Yes, you may.
Could you introduce yourself to the court, please?
I'm Dr. Tran.
And Dr. Tran, how are you involved in today's case?
Well, Andy Allen hired me to give an opinion on her husband's death.
Now, what do you do as a doctor?
I specialize in injuries related to water sports, like scuba diving.
And where did you go to school for this?
Well, I got my undergraduate degree from Duke in biology, and then went on to Loyola College in Chicago to get my medical degree.
Do you have any other certifications?
Yes, I'm certified in pathology as well as internal medicine. I'm a member of the American Society of Pathologists, the Forensic Scientists Association of America, and the Water Sports Experts Association.
Now, aside from all of those, how long have you been doing your job as a doctor?
I've been a doctor for 17 years now.
And approximately how many patients do you have?
400 total, about half of which are scuba diver.
So does this require you to have a working knowledge of scuba diving?
Totes.
Alright, so did you create a report for today's case?
Yes, I did.
And were you given sufficient facts and data to come to a conclusion?
Yes, I was.
What facts and data were you given?
Well, specifically to the case, I looked over several documents. I read affidavits of Andy Allen, Reggie Rogers, and Hayden Hathaway. I read the medical record of Lee Allen, and also Neptune's brochure for the diving expedition.
Now, did you have any outside sources that you used to make these documents all mean something in your report?
I did, actually. I focused on two treatises specifically. Number one was Scuba Diving 101. While I cannot agree with the document in its entirety, I can validate specifically the medical data. I also used breathing gas calculations, which I did use in its entirety.
So, were the methods that you used accurately applied in this case, reliably applied?
Yes.
Alright, so what conclusions did you come to in today's case?
Well, I had four main findings, which led ultimately to my final conclusion, which was that Lee Allen died of cerebral hypoxia due to errors on the part of Neptune.
So, what was the first of your four findings?
Well, number one was that Neptune failed to ascertain whether Lee Allen was physically and or medically capable of participating in scuba diving.
Did they require any medical information?
Nothing at all.
So, why is this a problem? What could stem from this?
Well, I mean, obviously, if Neptune is not aware of Lee's medical history, they don't know what risks he can pose in the water, and risks not only to himself, but also to the safety of the group as a whole.
What are some ailments that can affect scuba divers?
Well, three of the big ones would be barotrauma, pulmonary edema, and nitrogen narcosis.
What's nitrogen narcosis?
Nitrogen narcosis, in layman's terms, simply means that you're getting more nitrogen than oxygen to your brain, and it disorients you in a way.
Now, are there any pre-existing conditions that could trigger narcosis?
Yeah, any breathing conditions you would have or heart conditions could definitely have an increased impact on nitrogen narcosis.
You read Lee Allen's medical record, and did you find that any of the things that Lee Allen had would have triggered narcosis?
Yeah, Lee specifically did suffer from hypertension, and that can always increase the risk of nitrogen narcosis.
What's hypertension?
Hypertension is just a big word for high blood pressure.
So, what was the second finding that you had in today's case?
My second finding was that Neptune failed to recognize that Lee Allen was suffering from nitrogen narcosis.
What are some of the symptoms of narcosis?
Well, the main symptoms of narcosis, whenever you feel it coming on, would be dizziness, disorientation in the water. It's almost like becoming intoxicated from alcohol. From the outlet side, individual looking in, hazy eyes, not responding to questions or signals that you give in the water would be big signs of nitrogen narcosis.
So when would Neptune have noticed these symptoms?
Well, I believe on any dive that, well, let me say this. Many scuba divers suffer from nitrogen narcosis. Normally it's just on a small enough scale that you don't actually have to do anything about it. In Lee's case, I believe that that Neptune specifically did notice his symptoms on several of the dives leading up to the Hepburn expedition.
All right, and what is the cure, the treatment for narcosis?
There's only one way to get rid of your narcosis, and that would be to rise to the surface.
And to your knowledge, did Neptune encourage you to do this at any point?
No, not at all.
So moving on to your third point, what was your third point in coming to your conclusion?
Well, my third finding in this case was that Neptune employee Reggie Rogers could have done more to save Lee.
How did you come to this conclusion?
Well, I used specifically the two treatises that we discussed earlier, Breathing Gas Calculations and Scuba Diving 101, and used those as well as a breathing test I conducted on Reggie Rogers with the consent of Neptune and Rogers himself, and compiled that together to reconstruct the dive.
So what sort of calculation do you use to determine the amount of air that a diver consumes?
Well, there's a pretty simple equation that I can use. It's RMV times ambient pressure times the time that you're actually in the water.
What's RMV?
RMV stands for respiratory minute volume, or the air that you take in a minute. It's measured in many different ways. It changes per person. For an experienced diver, it would be roughly 12 liters per minute, all the way up to 25 for someone who is unexperienced. And of course, in an emergency situation, when there's a heightened use of oxygen, the RMV is going to skyrocket.
All right, so what is ambient pressure then?
Ambient pressure is just the pressure that you feel as you descend.
And finally, did you break up time in any manner in specific?
Yes, on this dive specifically, I broke the time up into 5 different sections. Number 1, the descent. Number 2, swimming through the Hepburn itself. Number 3, the ascent. And 4 and 5, decompression stops, number 1 and number 2.
Now, in your reconstruction of an average diver on a standard Hepburn dive, how many liter bars of air would it have taken a diver reasonably?
On a reasonable dive, I believe it would have taken 3,253 liter bars.
All right, so in the reconstruction you did of Reggie Rogers' dive, with the emergency period added in, how much air would that have taken him?
Well, for Reggie Rogers, using average calculations, I believe in that emergency situation, or with that situation added in, it would have taken roughly 7,300 liter bars.
And was there anything odd you noticed about Rogers' reconstruction?
Yeah, there were a couple things. First of all, he said that he began his ascent with 900 liter bars. I don't think that's true. I think it was closer to 1,400. When he surfaced, he had 300 liter bars left. From my calculations, I believe it would have taken Reggie Rogers roughly 1,800 liter bars to make that ascent. The fact that he survived with 900 and still had 300 liter bars left over is completely miraculous and, in my opinion, unimaginable.
So he had 300 liter bars left. Could he have made any more efforts to save Lee with those 300 liter bars?
But he could have taken the time it would have used to breathe 300 liter bars, yes.
All right, so moving on to your last point. What was your last finding?
My final finding, number 4, was that Neptune should not have permitted Lee Allen to remain at extreme depths for such a prolonged period of time and with such insufficient oxygen levels.
How much oxygen do they give each diver again?
They gave each diver 7,200 liter bars, 600 in their primary tank and 1,200 in the secondary tank.
And for an average diver with 20 respiratory minute volume, how much air would that have taken with the emergency period added in?
With the emergency period added in, I calculated that Lee Allen would have used roughly 7,300 liter bars.
Now, that's only a difference of 100 liter bars. Does that make a big difference?
On a normal dive, no. But in any emergency situation, especially with scuba diving, the simple 100 liter bars could be the difference between life and death.
Now, your final conclusion. What was your final conclusion in this case?
My final conclusion from the 4 findings that I used before was that Lee's death was caused by cerebral hypoxia.
And what's cerebral hypoxia?
It's a lack of oxygen to the brain. Basically, he drowned.
And what circumstances led to this lack of oxygen in Lee?
Well, the 4 findings I just discussed, those are the main points. And I believe that they all resulted from errors on the part of Neptune.
Is that a good closing?